Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for the Campus Bubble webinar series. Today's topic, Twitter chats for admitted students. My name is Nika Shaletska, Senior Campus Consultant here at Campus Bubble, and I'll be your host today. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This afternoon, I'll send out an email with a link to the webinar slides and recording for your reference, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. During the webinar, if you have any technical issues, please send us a message using your GoToWebinar control panel. You should see a chat box at the bottom where you can send us a message. You can also use this chat box to submit questions at any point during the webinar. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the session, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we have time for. Finally, we'll have some polls throughout the webinar. If you would like to participate, you can do so through your GoToWebinar control panel as well. And with that, we'll jump right into our first poll. Just want to get a sense of how familiar everyone on the webinar is with Twitter chats. Maybe you've hosted a chat before, perhaps you participated in a chat, maybe you're just a Twitter user, or perhaps you're still just trying to figure this whole Twitter thing out. So if you'd like to participate, you can do so now, and we'll share the results momentarily. All right, and it looks like most of you are Twitter users who have not really participated in or hosted chats before, so I'm glad you're joining us today. Before we go on, why host a Twitter chat in the first place? Sure, it's about answering students' questions and having a social media presence, but it's also about much more than that. It's about connections and relationships. A long time ago, back when I went to college, those relationships were primarily formed through campus visits and other events for admitted students. But now social channels are platforms for facilitating and strengthening those same connections with your college or university. And today's students are very adept at building relationships through social media with other people, with brands, and with institutions. And they're looking for those opportunities with your college as well. According to data from the 2016 admissions report, they found that students really want to interact with others on social media. They want to engage with currently enrolled students, with admissions counselors, financial aid representatives, and even with other students. 4 out of 5 students who were surveyed said that a conversation on social media influence their enrollment decision. And what we're seeing is that when given the opportunity, students take that. They want to engage with others. They want to make those connections. Our own admitted student engagement app is one example of that. At one of the universities we work with, about 1,000 admitted students have joined the app. And in the 4 months that it's been live, there have been nearly 40,000 messages sent between admitted students, admissions staff, and current students. So that tells me that students are forming new relationships, they're making connections with the college, developing a stronger emotional connection, all of which leads to a greater likelihood of enrollment. And a Twitter chat is just another means of accomplishing that. So now that we made the case for Twitter chats, one of the keys to their success, as with many other things, is planning. So let's start with scheduling the chat. Most colleges tend to host those chats Sunday through Thursday evenings, and they tend to be 1 to 2 hours in length. It's not uncommon for students to kind of pop in and out of the chat. Maybe they just have a question, or maybe they stay the entire time. But when you're scheduling your own chat, you should really consider your admitted student population. If they're primarily located in one state or geographic area, then you can prioritize that time zone when scheduling your chat. If, on the other hand, your students are geographically dispersed, you may want to consider a time that could work well for everyone. And a lot of colleges choose 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern time, which is 5 to 7 Pacific time. So it's a kind of a good middle ground. But you could consider hosting multiple sessions of your chat as well. So for our next poll, I'm curious if your admissions office has a separate Twitter account. Some colleges choose to create separate social media accounts for their admissions office to more effectively target their messaging towards prospective students, whereas one general account tends to have multiple audiences. So I'm just curious where everyone on the webinar is with that. All right, looks like half of your institutions have a separate account for the admissions office, and a few of you are considering adding a separate one. Well, regardless of whether or not you use a separate account for Twitter for your admissions office, hashtags are key to your Twitter chat. They're key to the success. And they're really important to get the most out of Twitter in general. According to the Buffer blog, which is one of my favorite social media blogs, hashtags are clickable keywords used to categorize content. Lots of great alliteration there. And in terms of your chat, your hashtag will be added to the end of each tweet. And that will not only make it easier for your participants to keep track of the chat, but it'll make it easier for you to keep track of the questions coming in. So mission critical. Now, you could potentially use one of your college's existing hashtags, but you might want to consider creating one just for your chats. Some tips: keep it short and easy to remember. We also recommend choosing an actionable hashtag and potentially one that you could reuse if you decide to host Twitter chats in the future. Maybe you'll want to host a chat with your students in the fall when they're applying. At the bottom right, you can see a few examples from some other colleges and universities. I really like from St. Mary's College in California, Ask a Gale. To me, that implies that students will be asking a current student and getting a response from a current student. And Western Kentucky University uses Chat WKU. And they host a whole series of Twitter chats throughout the spring and even into the summer. And we'll see some more examples from them later. But the most important thing, which is not on this slide, is that you should definitely check to make sure the hashtag isn't already widely used before you make your final decision. Student ambassadors, of course, another key to success, since as I'm sure you all know, admitted students very much value having the opportunity to connect with them and to hear about campus life from their perspective. We recommend serving as moderators yourselves and allowing your student ambassadors to really drive the conversation. And they can also actively engage participants. Sometimes students are just observing the chat. And one of my former colleagues, an admissions counselor who's now at Stanford, recommended that if you see participants are liking tweets or retweeting them, but not posting any questions, to have your student ambassadors reach out to those students with a question. And he found that the participants were really open to that because it was a current student who was reaching out to them. Student ambassadors can also help you manage your chat and strategize with you around preparing content. Some things you might want to gather ahead of time: a list of campus resources and shortened bit.ly links to those websites. That could be anything from your career office to your campus safety office, or even to a site that has information about the town where your college is located and what there is to do there. You might want to consider collecting some images from your campus and from campus life and having those maybe on your desktop and ready to go. I don't often see images in Twitter chats, but images are much more engaging, of course. So I think if you have them prepared, it can be easy to add them in. We mentioned having student ambassadors actively engage your chat participants with questions. So it might be worthwhile to brainstorm some ideas around that, as well as some talking points in case you run into a quiet spell, which we'll also talk about in just a moment. Finally, before your chat, if you're not already using any tools to help you more effectively schedule your tweets and post to social media, you may want to get one of these free apps because they can really help you manage your chat a lot better and in general, just use Twitter more effectively. So here we have some shots from TweetDeck and Hootsuite. These are some of the more popular platforms that people use. And you can choose what's in each of these columns. You can see your notifications, your mentions. You can track your hashtags in one of them. So it's just a good way to keep track of your chat as it's happening. So now it's time to execute your chat. When your chat starts, as with any other event, you'll want to start off with welcome, introductions, and instructions. And we'll take a look at some examples here. Again, we'll use examples from Western Kentucky University. I recommend checking out their log of Twitter chats for some great examples. They start off by welcoming students and introducing guests. And they ran a series of chats again throughout the spring and summer, and each chat hosted different offices on campus. So in this case, the admissions office, the financial aid office, and the Office of Housing and Residential Life were some of the guests. Then they went on to let students know how a Twitter chat works, and you can see that they had 3 tweets all about making sure to add the hashtag ChatWKU. And again, that's really important because if students don't add that hashtag, you may not see the question quite as easily. We have an example here from UCLA. I really like what they did here. They created images to better introduce their student ambassadors. And I really love this because I get a much better sense of who the student is from this image with this information about her than just from the text about her in the tweet. So this is something you may want to consider as well. When it comes to replying to questions during the chat, you'll of course want to keep it brief. Tweets are limited to just 140 characters, and you have even less to work with once you add your hashtags and students' Twitter handles and any images. So brevity is key. And here's some examples, again, from Western Kentucky's chat. You can see at the top, a student named Scarlett posed a question. Now, she did not use the chat hashtag, but she did mention the account that was hosting the chat. So that'll be something you'll want to look out for in case students forget to add that hashtag. And again, tools can really be helpful in noticing that. When replying, you'll want to hit the reply button, but it's proper Twitter custom to not only begin with the student's Twitter handle, but to add the period before the reply. And the reason for that is just increased visibility. If you don't add that period, Twitter considers this a conversation and doesn't add it to your main Twitter page, which just means that students may not be able to see the reply, especially if they're following along on your Twitter page, and they may not be able to see it. So just add the period before students' Twitter handles to increase visibility, and of course, add those hashtags. Now, hopefully you have a lot of active participants during your chat asking a lot of questions. But even if you're not getting a lot of questions, that doesn't mean that students aren't there. And it is possible, I know I've done this myself in Twitter chats, that some students may just be lurking, that's the proper term, and merely observing the chat. So you want to keep the conversation going for the entire duration of your chat. And that's why you plan some content ahead of time. You can see here that Western Kentucky actually kicked off their chat with one of these planned questions and some best practices around that. It's pretty common in Twitter chats for the moderator to pose questions that are labeled Q1, Q2, Q3, and so on, and for the answers to be labeled A1, A2, A3, etc. And that just helps make it clear which answers go with which questions. And you can see here that this was actually a two-part answer. So they had A1.1 and A1.2. Good also, as mentioned earlier, try actively engaging participants. If you notice some students are liking your tweets or retweeting them during the chat, but not asking any questions, you could consider having your student ambassadors actively reach out to them and engage them in conversation. And although I couldn't find any examples, here's what I would have my student ambassadors tweet, or something along those lines. And again, participants will be much more receptive when it's a current student who's reaching out to them. Now, once your chat is over, it's important to do a little bit of follow-up and assessment. First, you may need to personally follow up with some students, especially if they asked any tough questions or certain things about their personal circumstances, basically anything that couldn't be answered or that needs a more in-depth response than is possible in 140 characters. In terms of assessing your chat, again, tools like Hootsuite or TweetDeck help a lot with this. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty painstaking process of counting up all these things. Some metrics you'll want to keep track of are the number of questions that were asked, the number of participants, and you can kind of gauge that based on the number of different accounts that asked questions or that retweeted or liked tweets during the chat. You'll also want to make note of the number of interactions. And again, that's something that tools like TweetDeck and Hootsuite measure pretty readily. The number of likes of those tweets, number of retweets, and to keep track of analytics during the chat versus after the chat. And again, tools can help immensely with that. Finally, your chat will generate some really, really good content. So be sure to repurpose that. One application that a lot of colleges and businesses and organizations use is Storify, and that allows you to select certain tweets and essentially put them into a story. And then you can add those to your website almost in a little bit of a slideshow. And I can actually, on the website for Western Kentucky, I can click through all these tweets and relive the Twitter chat. And it's just a way for students who may not have been able to participate, or even students who didn't know about it, but go back later on to find that content. So be sure to repurpose it. It's got lots of great stuff there. All right, our last poll for the day. What topics would you like to see covered in a future webinar? We're always looking for new ideas, want to be as helpful as possible. And you can actually select one or more of these answer choices. And if your topic isn't listed, feel free to chat us your ideas. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results of that. It looks like lots of people are interested in continuing to engage students through social media. Of course, hot topic, as well as user-generated content and some interest in live stream video. So really appreciate your feedback there. And before we go on to Q&A, just want to tell you a little bit about Campus Bubble. We believe colleges should invest in their most qualified prospects, admitted students. So we've designed a student-centered, personalized approach to yield marketing. And that's because Generation Z overwhelmingly wants personalized communications from admissions offices. The data from the most recent social admissions report found that to be true. And in general, marketing is moving towards very personalized communication. So it's not surprising that young people want that as well. The first step in our process, we personalize the messaging to admitted students through a multi-channel marketing campaign, email, text, social media, that drives students to personalized websites where they receive information just for them, relevant to their personal and academic interests. Next, we have the Bubble app, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. It's an admitted student engagement app where students have the opportunity to engage with one another, with admissions staff, and with current students. Again, all towards the goal of building relationships and developing those emotional connections with your college or university. It can message other students, ask questions, start their own groups, chat with current students, and even find a roommate. And students are receptive to these apps, with about half of students saying they would download one to communicate with a college representative, learn more about the college, or just get updates on admissions information. And finally, step 3, of course, the most important part, enroll. Our Insight dashboard helps admissions staff understand the engagement data and students' likelihood of enrollment to help with prioritizing efforts. And all of this can be up and running in just a few weeks with no IT resources needed. So we'll be happy to tell you more about that. And with that, we'll go into Q&A. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to submit those through your GoToWebinar control panel. And a question coming in from Kathleen: are there other social media platforms that can be used for managing chats with admitted students? And I have seen, I saw that Morehouse College a few years ago actually used a Facebook event for a live chat series that they called Morehouse Mondays. And the president and the first year dean even took part in those. So recommend checking that out. I believe it's on, it was on a blog, the Social Media for Colleges blog, so you can learn a little bit more about that. Another question: do you recommend any other social media resources for connecting with admitted students, or rather any resources that can learn more about how to connect with admitted students? Again, the blog I just mentioned, Social Media for Colleges, if you use that, and the author was on a bit of a hiatus for the past year, but is back to posting and has lots of great examples from colleges and universities around the country. So lots of inspiration there. And also the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education, CASE, has lots of great Twitter chats on social media and other topics, and a whole archive of them. So I recommend going through those. Lots of great ideas there. Question for Melinda, from Melinda: what is the most common way used to promote these events to social media or to admitted students? Good question. So of course, through email, adding them to your website, especially if you have a specific site dedicated to admitted students, and through social media. And finally, last question regarding your admitted student engagement app. This is a question from Glenn. To what extent does IT need to be involved to get that set up? And again, no IT resources are actually needed for that. It's all in the cloud. All right, and with that, it was right on time, 25 minutes. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Later this afternoon, again, I'll send out an email with a link to the webinar slides and recording. So just check your inbox for that. And if you have any questions or just want to give us feedback, I'd love to hear from you at any time. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day and a great weekend. And thanks for joining us.